everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here, joined by Arif Hasan, the Wide Left newsletter. Now it's wideleft.football. You can go and read all of Arif's awesome work. Arif, you are the big star again of draft season with the consensus draft board, which I've used in a lot of my coverage to analyze what the Vikings did. And we won't get into all those debates of whether they paid too much for Dallas Turner or not. But before we dive into our topic, I did want to get your reaction because we have not spoken since then about how this ended up playing out for the Minnesota Vikings. What did you think, just as a broad overall, how they set themselves up for the future by getting JJ McCarthy and Dallas Turner?
Yeah, I mean, I love the JJ McCarthy move. I mean, yeah, I think people who follow me know that I wasn't like the biggest JJ McCarthy fan. But that was like, in the context of like drafting him third or fourth, right? I think trading up one spot, grabbing him at 10, that's great. Dallas Turner's a great player. He's ninth on the consensus board. I think you noted that, which is good. But obviously there's a whole process here that I don't know. It's a very top heavy approach to the draft for a team that I don't know has like justified a top heavy approach. Um, it seems like their process is a lot more interesting for UDFAs than it is for 6th, 7th round picks. So if they can, and no one can, but if they can consistently replace underperforming mid and late rounders with undrafted free agents, sure, why not? Like that seems to be something that they're very good at, which maybe I don't know, but I think that the players they grabbed are good. I just wish they had grabbed more of them.
Well, we all do. Everybody wants more cap space, more draft picks. Usually you have to tank to get all those wonderful things. But I do agree with you. When I looked at your consensus board versus some of the UDFAs and the total haul of players that they got, it actually kind of looks more like they got them in the fourth, fifth, and
Yeah.
sixth round, because they got a lot of guys from UDFA who were much higher, like Gabriel Murphy, who's someone that we'll be tracking as we go along. But I only asked you the big picture question to set up our topic, which is that I think that now the Vikings have their quarterback in place and Dallas Turner to boot, that Vikings fans are at the highest point of enthusiasm that I have seen them in, I think, some time, really, since maybe the day that they signed Kirk Cousins to, at least they thought, take them to another level from where they had been in 2017. Didn't happen. So that enthusiasm ran out pretty quickly. Bounced up and down throughout the Cousins era, the playoff win, the game in Buffalo where they went to 8-1, I think, after winning that game. But this is a huge spike in Vikings fan belief, because it is not the short-lived, hey, we got a big win one week and then went out and had disappointment for the next week. This, I think, is because of the Vikings' overall plan, which is to build around JJ McCarthy using that cap space that they have going into next year. So what I wanted to figure out is just how enthusiastic Vikings fans should be by comparing them to the rest of the league. So what we're going to do is go back and forth and draft teams essentially by how pumped they should be about their team over the next 2 seasons. Obviously, this year, the standards for the Vikings are a little bit different because we view this as a transition year. So we're going to make it over the next 2 seasons. So how much do you believe in your franchise over the next 2 years? And we're going to go back and forth with teams until we get to the Vikings, and then discuss the reasons that people should be pumped, and then also skepticism that they might have. Everybody understand? All at once? Yes. Okay, great. So let's start out. I'm going to take the first overall draft pick
Oh,
because it's
all right.
my show and we
Sure.
all know it. We all know who it is. It's not hard. The Kansas City Chiefs should have the most belief in their team. They have the greatest quarterback on earth. Their team has plenty of young talent, which, what the heck? And as long as their receiver somehow stays out of jail, then they should be totally fine going forward as a top contending team. Any disagreement with Kansas City for fans that should believe in their team the most?
No disagreement whatsoever.
All right, who's number two? Now, this is a more
Uh,
interesting question.
yeah, I think it's super interesting. I think that from an organizational perspective, there are some teams that jump the line, as it were. I mean, there are teams that I think have like a little bit more talent than this team or whatever. But I just got to pick the Baltimore Ravens. Extraordinarily well-run organization. Really great at getting value in the draft, really great at getting value in free agency, really good at negotiating with their own internal free agents. Also, they have an MVP quality quarterback, right? So all of those are like key ingredients. I do think that there are other more talented teams that will have a little bit more talent this year and next year. But I sometimes you got to trust organizations and coaches. And great coach, great organization, really well run.
Yeah, I think Baltimore, just even since Lamar Jackson emerged on the scene, would be at the top of this list that every single year they go into a season believing, hey, we should win the Super Bowl this year. And they have no reason to think otherwise after the season that Lamar Jackson just had. Now, this is a tough one because there are teams that might have a better case. But I think as far as a 2 year window, looking at it as the standard has now been raised to Super Bowl and the hype is enormous for this club. I want to say the Houston Texans here
Yeah,
because
it's a
with
tough
the
one.
amount of money that they were allowed to spend around CJ Stroud, we know this hack, but also the way that CJ Stroud played, the fact that they acquired Daniil Hunter and Stephon Diggs, just going all in on the 2015 Vikings draft. I'm not sure that there's another team that people are more jacked up about. That doesn't mean that they have the highest Super Bowl odds necessarily, but as far as looking into our crystal ball a little bit going forward, I think they're deserving of the number 3 spot.
Yeah, I think they're definitely like in the conversation. I don't think I would have picked them number three, but certainly I think they would go top five just because of the quarterback talent that they've got available, the fact that they were able to generate more value out of their receivers, before Stephon Diggs came in, than I think a lot of people would have expected. I mean, obviously getting a lot out of Tank Dell was great, but I mean, having a breakout year for Noah Brown, having a breakout year for Nico Collins, that's incredible. And now they don't have to worry that much about the injury that Tank Dell unfortunately suffered this past week, which is an incredible position to be in, right? And they've got a great coach that a lot of people believe in. So I like it. It is a difficult one to get behind just because I don't know what the track record of this front office is, and you don't have a huge sample size on how good the quarterback is, right? There's like those kinds of other questions, but certainly that's like quibbling between 3 and 5, right? Like they're a very good team here. I think I'm going to pick a team that's coming off of a disappointing season, but whose process I think is good. Disappointing for them. I think Vikings fans would have loved to have it. The Philadelphia Eagles started off the season 10-1. Bunch of analytics nerds, eggheads, don't watch the game, said they were frauds. And then they began to fraud it up, um, and get disappointed in the playoffs. But this is a team that has a young quarterback that is continuing to build along that offensive line that's made them so good. Obviously, having a retiring center, that's going to suck, but for the most part, really great offensive line. They had some issues in the secondary. They attacked that aggressively in the draft. The first two picks were cornerbacks, both steals against the consensus board for what that's worth. And just generally speaking, find a way to find good players at whatever pick range or cost that might be. They let go of players that are typically, not that valuable. So, for example, they let a couple of linebackers leave, 2 years ago, for enormous money. And like, hey, you look at that depth here, you're like, hey, they could have used some linebackers. Yeah, they had like 6 or 7 injuries. It's kind of hard. But the linebackers they let go of did not have amazing years. So I think a smart move. And they're just generally like a really well run organization. Again, I'm picking a team that has a good process, that has a good quarterback, that generally understands kind of what the principles are that build good teams, and they've had the success to show it.
Yeah, it's interesting because that I wouldn't have gone Philly quite here because of the way that they ended last season and how disappointing it was. And interesting that when Philadelphia was kind of fraudulent, that Vikings fans were pointing at them saying it's not that great. But in 2022, maybe not so much with the Vikings. And in both instances, we can spot regression. But I think I would have gone here if we were popping over to the NFC with the Detroit Lions
So tough
because
for me. That's so tough for me.
because I mean, now I think that they view themselves, and that's what I'm going to go with my next pick here. They view themselves as having a window, and I know they're going to have to pay Jared Goff. That will make it more difficult. They just paid Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell. We know where this bus goes eventually. It goes to too expensive town, and unless you draft unbelievably well toward the back end of the first round, maybe the Vikings helped them out by not taking Terry and Arnold there and gave them one of the best corners in the draft, but I'm still not entirely sold on their defense. They're relying on Marcus Davenport to be a thing, which I don't know why you would rely on Marcus Davenport to be a thing, but top five offense consistently. There's nothing more consistent. And they kept their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, which makes you think, well, they could repeat what they were able to do. Jamison Williams might be ready to have a breakout season if he doesn't bet on softball championships or something in a team hotel or whatever the heck he did. So
Yeah.
I think Detroit is very high on themselves, and they believe that they could win the Super Bowl in the next 2 years.
Phenomenal coaching. I think both offensively and defensively, even though the defensive talent is not entirely there. Phenomenal coaching, obviously, head coach. Seems like a great eye for talent. I think it's a little bit oversold, but then the consensus board loved them this year as opposed to last year. So who's to say? But the issue just for me is like how sustainable it is to be able to run first team. Again, there's easily a top 10 team in this sort of category, right? But it's just like a question of like, hey, maybe I should let go of my prejudices around Jared Goff. He's played well for several seasons now with the Lions, so that's fine. Amon-Ra St. Brown, fine. But just building a run first team, I mean, we've seen a lot of, really great rookie running backs have really phenomenal seasons like Jahmyr Gibbs had, and then kind of not turn it around that much, right? So I think that for me, the Lions just don't go top five just because I'm concerned about the offensive philosophy, even though I love the offensive coordinator, if that makes sense. But I wouldn't have waited that much longer because great coaching takes you pretty far.
All right, who's next on your list?
This one is really tough because it's a bad organization. Uh, but I think I want to go with the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow is very good, right? They the receiver issue where the T Higgins problem or whatever, fine, but they've got Jamar Chase, right? Who cares? So they've got that. The offensive line is slowly getting better. I'm just worried about the way that they treat free agents and their ability to offer guarantees and bring people in and stuff like that. I don't love their process, but I like Joe Burrow a lot, and they still do have a lot of defensive talent, right? So I mean, they still have like Hilton and Hendrickson and the whole shebang. And they were able to convince some guys to resign. So there's something there. And the organizational penalty after having like an elite young quarterback, I think drops them to about, I guess we're at 6 now, right? So 6.
Yeah, with Joe Burrow, he's another one of those quarterbacks that goes in the Lamar Jackson category of your team should believe every single year. Same with the Josh Allen. I'm interested where both of us have Buffalo on this list because they lost their top wide receiver. But I think that they belong very, very high, in part because I was very impressed with how their coach handled the Jake Browning era. And I thought that of
Good point.
all the coaches that lost their quarterbacks, Zach Taylor stood out the most as tailoring his offense
All right.
to Jake Browning. And look, we know Jake Browning is a very smart guy, as Mike Zimmer once said, but I don't think he has the most physical talent. And to be able to work a screen game, work a play action game, and be competitive with him was impressive. And so I expect them to be back there. And I think it would be splitting hairs with them and several other teams. Where I'm struggling here is whether to put Green Bay or San Francisco next. I think what Green Bay fans saw from Jordan Love, the age of their team, the emergence of their receivers, and again, their coaching, very, very good from Matt LaFleur, belongs here after the second half of the season for Jordan Love. They should be snorting all of the Jordan Love hype up this offseason. But also, we have just seen San Francisco almost be dynastic in how they can get to the
Yeah.
NFC Championship. I mean, they're like the Eagles under Andy Reid, where it's just every single year they're there. They drafted a receiver, overdrafted probably by your board, but a guy I really like in Ricky Pearsall. I'm curious to see how the Brandon Ayuk situation plays out. is he going to be there? Are they going to trade him to the Steelers?
Right.
Like, what
Yeah.
that matters to me for their enthusiasm. They will eventually get expensive, but right now they're not at all with Brock Purdy. What it really comes down to is whether you think Brock Purdy was kind of a Case Keenum 1 year thing, or if you think he can do it year after year, which makes me want to put Green Bay here, even though the samples are similarly small. But
Samples, yeah, very similar.
Jordan Love is so much larger and he throws the ball so much harder. And I also think that they're not expensive like Green Bay. But Love will be eventually, but they're not expensive as a roster. I'm not sure here. I think I just want to go play it safe and go San Francisco because they always just prove that they're going to be there. It's just, is Christian McCaffrey going to stay at that level? Like, that's a question.
Yeah,
They have,
that's yeah.
I think, more regression possibilities than Green Bay.
Yeah. I guess if you're going to like map out the ways that they could regress, I think that there's more available there to them. I am just a little bit more skeptical of Jordan Love. I think that um, though I am also a Brock Purdy skeptic for sure. I think that there's more that Brock Purdy has done. I think that Love, like, there are more good games of Brock Purdy that you can point to, right? And what's really interesting is that his most high profile games are not those. It's very annoying. But with Love, it really is the back half of the season and, of course, the playoffs that you actually see good games from him. And while it is good to progress as a quarterback, obviously, I found historically that if you see, especially at quarterback, but basically at any position, if you see someone who has a sample where for half the season they're bad and half the season they're good, they're probably not the back half a season guy. They might be somewhere in between, or they might actually be bad. But these small samples can trick you a lot, especially when they occur at the back half. This was like the Geno Smith trap that the Jets kept on falling into. Of course, Geno Smith eventually turned into quite a good quarterback, but every year he'd start off with like, "Hey man, he just finished off the season really strong." It's like, doesn't matter. So that's like the concern with Jordan Love. So I would take the 49ers above the Packers here. And I also, like, obviously both have really good coaching. I do put Shanahan above um, the coach of the Packers, whose name I should know
Yeah,
right
the
now.
coach of the Packers. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm not helping
Um,
with that. That's absurd.
yeah.
LaFleur. LaFleur, coach of the Packers.
There's multiple LaFleurs. Uh,
There are many LaFleurs. Yeah.
yeah.
This would be Matt
Uh,
LaFleur.
Yeah, so I think that like the organization that the 49ers have, both in the front office and in coaching, has produced a lot more just in terms of like, sending people out to the rest of the NFL, and also just been a lot more consistent. So I do like that a little bit more, and I like Purdy just a little bit more. So I take the 49ers above them. It feels weird not picking the Bills yet, but I think I am going to pick the 49ers here just for that reason.
Okay, I already picked the 49ers, so
Oh, wait, no. So, okay, I thought you picked the Packers.
oh,
Okay.
okay. No, yeah, sorry. That was my bad. I was haggling between both.
Okay, so
So
you
I
picked the
picked the
49ers.
49ers. Yeah.
Gosh, until I see more from their new defensive coordinator, I'm not picking the Packers yet. God, I want to cheat a little bit and still skip the Bills, though.
I think the Bills
Cowboys,
should be a little bit
Dolphins.
down on themselves. I mean, truly, like
Yeah,
they have the great quarterback, but even great quarterback teams sometimes have a dip, and we have never seen Josh Allen without Stephon Diggs, or
yeah,
I mean, not since he was
right.
first developing as a quarterback. So I'm kind of curious about that. And they
Let's
drafted one receiver, like they haven't
let's
really solved that
go.
problem.
Let's go Dallas Cowboys, a perpetual
Oh, really?
disappointment team. Yeah.
Okay.
Analytically sound, generally just full of talent. Obviously, every year people hype up the Dallas Cowboys offensively and defensively, and they disappoint. But I can only go by kind of like what I've watched and what I know that they are on paper. And they've got a pretty good, not as great as it used to be, but a pretty good offensive line, right? They've got a very good quarterback who was living up to expectations for most of the year last year. They're attacking the receiver issue, right? They're helping CD Lamb out, and that defense. Maybe they don't have Stephon Gilmore anymore, but that defense is insane. So I don't know. It's like it's tough for me to look away from the Cowboys, which is so funny because of how poorly run they were for so long, and then without any change in technically the organizational structure, they started becoming a very well run team. In part because Will McClay had a lot more say, in part because Stephen Jones was able to overrule Jerry Jones. But like the flow chart for the organization didn't change at all, but how that organization played out has produced much more stable outcomes. Plus, I don't think they leaked their draft board this year, which is, well, they
Oh,
the running back they did, but they wanted to draft Jonathan Brooks and they told everybody, and then they couldn't. But other than that, that's a lot better.
It
That's
is a
progress.
yearly tradition. I'm
Yeah,
sad that I didn't get to see that in the background of one of their team videos or something. So the reason I would have had Dallas lower is just because there's Dak Prescott uncertainty in the future. I haven't felt like they've done a lot this offseason to add, but of course they're a really good team last year. And I think that they've been punched in the mouth in the playoffs enough to the point where their fans should be nervous that that's just all they can really
yeah, it's
be.
just who they
Is
are.
is
Yeah,
a team that just feels too much pressure in the playoffs and then forgets how to play football. But Mike Zimmer's addition there, we know Zimmer. We know what he does with top notch talent, and it wouldn't surprise me if they had the best defense in the entire league. So maybe a team that we're kind of making too much over smaller things like quarterback contract drama and, did they add enough receivers or whatever in the offseason? Maybe that's like not seeing the forest through the trees, that this has been one of the best teams in the regular season in the NFL for years. Well, I will pick Green Bay here and just sort of think that they're buying into fully Jordan Love and that they've got an opportunity here to. If a couple of these wide receivers continue the way that they're going, they drafted an offensive lineman, which was not sexy, but could really help something that they need there. And like, you couldn't be much worse than what they were doing on defense. If there is a Ed Donatel to Brian Flores ish shift there, that could be one of the best teams in the NFL. I was buying more of Jordan Love, I think, for two reasons. Because one, his relationship with Green Bay Packers coach X is pretty darn impressive. LaFleur is his name. And I really thought that after half the season, what was different was LaFleur understanding what Jordan Love sees and what he doesn't see, and what works for him and what doesn't work for him. That seemed to take a shift toward the end of the season. Maybe that is too much buying in. Sam Darnold had a similar end of a year where everyone went, it led the league in something in the last 4 weeks or whatever, which can be dubious. I agree. But their receiving core, where they have not just one or two good players, but numerous options. I think that they have a legitimate chance over the next 2 years to take advantage before Jordan Love, his cap hits become truly exorbitant and difficult to work around. After this, now we are starting, I think, to sniff the territory of where the Minnesota Vikings could potentially be, somewhere in this ballpark, I
this is
think.
a good range for them. Still not picking them, but this is a
Okay.
good range for them. I'll stop the slide. I'll pick the Bills.
Okay.
Um, a quarterback, right? Like at some point, you just have to acknowledge that having a top five quarterback is worth it. I mean, we still haven't picked the Chargers yet, so it's but at some
Do
point,
they have a top notch quarterback?
I do think they have a top notch quarterback. I think Justin Herbert's quite good.
Justin
Um,
Kirkbert is pretty decent. Yeah.
rough. Uh, but
Hey, I'm the guy sitting at the desk that says, "Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong."
we'll get there when we get there.
Okay.
Josh Allen is a very good quarterback. Obviously not having Stephon Diggs, obviously I think just mismanaging a lot of that roster and not I think having the goods at offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator is a big problem. Not having a ton of receiver talent. I'm not a huge believer in Keon Coleman, despite how charismatic this dude is. I love him, but I don't think he's very good at receiver. I hope he proves me wrong. But then it's just like a bunch of like, I could see it, guys, but no, yeah, guys. It's like Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Chase Claypool. Like, okay, uh, I could see it, but like they're gonna have to demonstrate that. I mean, the offensive line is okay. It's like Deion Dawkins and a bunch of dudes. The defensive line, like I expect Rousseau to have a good season, but I don't know. It's a lot of like, yeah, man, your window did pass, huh?
It
You haven't
did. I think it
like the
did.
window's gone,
Yep.
So that's where I'm at. It's the quarterback is kind of upholding this ranking right here.
And also, when you trade Diggs, you sort of acknowledge that. I mean, even when the Vikings traded Diggs, they acknowledged that the window had passed. And now they traded him to another team that has a window. Why they would trade him to an AFC team that's on the rise that you might face in the playoffs and have Diggs pull some stuff against you is questionable,
It's a
in my
lot.
opinion. The way they've handled the offensive coordinator situation, also questionable. Let's bring in a total noob at first. And I don't really understand that. And then
Just
it wasn't
hard.
as if Joe Brady had proved much. It reminds me a little bit, and this is going way, way back, but John Elway before they brought in Kubiak and Shanahan, where it was just, hey,
That's
Elway,
actually a
just
good, yeah.
do something insane,
Figure it out,
okay?
man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll give you some guys that run for like 600 yards a year and a handful of decent receivers, Mark
Here's
Jackson or
the
whatever.
XFL's top receiver.
Yeah, right.
Make hay.
Just go nuts. And then he would get the Super Bowl and get blasted by the 49ers. They'd be like, is Elway clutch? You're like, come on. So anyway, that's
It's
old
the
guy.
comeback record holder clutch.
Right. But, kind of reminds me a little bit of the same thing. So they are deserving of that respect. Here's where I'm struggling. I want to put Chicago here because they are in position over the next 2 years, if Caleb Williams clicks, to be an incredible team. But of course, that requires Caleb Williams to be incredible if it's going to happen. The team that I feel has been totally left out so far that may be more deserving is the Miami
Yep.
Dolphins.
Yeah.
It's just like they have a really great coach. They have great weapons. They drafted even more speed. They had a decent enough defense. It really comes down to, again, with the quarterback, is he good enough to take them anywhere else
And
than
can he
where they
last?
went? Right. And so if you're talking about the next 2 years, Chicago this year is probably not going to go too far, but 2025, do we think that Tua is kind of a ceiling type of guy, no matter what you put around him, that he's going to have a playoff game where he has to go somewhere cold and just lose? And does that mean Chicago deserves to be better? I might just go Chicago here. I'm maybe that's being a little bit of a hater because I do really like Tua more than maybe the consensus, so to speak. But I just think what Chicago has done with their tank and the amount of talent they've put on this roster over the last 2 years puts them in position by the end of 2025 to
Yeah.
potentially be a behemoth. So I'm going to go Chicago here.
Yeah, I don't super love how Chicago has handled a ton of their draft process. I'm not going to give them too much credit for Caleb Williams because dunk, but I don't know. I have suspicions about the front office from a draft perspective. Everything else they seem to be handling insanely well, right? They're bringing in a ton of talent. Yeah, they overpaid for some linebackers, but whatever. They retained their high level cornerback. That's really great to see. They're building out the trenches on both sides. They actually did a very good job with that offensive line after the disaster it was 2-3 years ago. So yeah, I mean, there's like stuff to work with there. The head coach and just the coaching situation in general, I'm not buying. So that's like I think a problem for me, and that's why I would prefer Miami over Chicago. So I'm glad that they slid to me. Um, I I love that coaching staff. Obviously, the head coach is great, but I think that you talk about a quarterback and a ceiling, and that's fair. This is also a team that like put up 70 against the
Mhm.
Broncos, but they put up 70, right? They did tail off at the second half of the season. Maybe that has something to do with the cold. That's pretty important. But I think that for the most part, we know that Tua is a top half quarterback who's got the capability to produce like a top seven-ish quarterback, great receiving core. I shouldn't even say functional offensive line. Work in progress there. Um, really great defensive. I think a very underrated defensive line. And they know when to cut weight on defense. I mean, they've gotten rid of some really high profile guys that they should have, and they were right to. Xavier Howard is still floating around out there. So I like that coaching staff a lot. I like the way that offense has the ability to create. I do like some of the pieces they have on defense. And the coaching staff for me swings it, right? Like I believe Caleb Williams is going to be a fantastic quarterback. But that is more a projection. I think Tua, despite the health concerns, despite the limitations, has demonstrated that the production is available right now. So I'm taking the Dolphins over the next 2 years more than the Chicago Bears.
Hold on. Adam Schefter just tweeted something. Oh,
Oh,
Jared
there it is. Yeah.
Jared Goff just signed a 4-year, $212 million contract extension that includes $170 million guaranteed. Now, I am, by the way, the biggest Jared Goff believer, and you may be the skeptic. But the way that Goff executes an offense and does not make mistakes, not a lot of sacks, not a lot of interceptions, arm talent, just understanding where to go with the football, those things, I think makes him a top-notch quarterback that is deserving of this. This is going to be hellacious, though, to work around for them several years out. This 2-year window, I'm sure they can still manage around this because they've drafted pretty well. but that really puts a mark of where their window is. It's the next 2 years. So I think we're right to kind of put them still at the top, but also say this has an expiration date with Jared Goff. And also Ben Johnson probably gets a job if they, perform as well next year. So very interesting that we were just talking about that Jared Goff extension. Do you want a quick thought on that before? So you're taking Miami here.
Yeah.
Before I make my next
No,
pick, you
I
got a
think
quick
you
take?
kind of nailed it all with the Goff stuff. Obviously, I believe in him a lot less. I think like he is also a limited quarterback. I think that when you take the possibility of the run out of the game by situation, third and long and stuff like that, there are some issues that crop up. But I mean, he's a lot better than I had imagined he would be. He has proven me wrong, I think, time and again. Both in terms of like just you watch him play and you see the quickness of process that wasn't there at UCLA, and also statistically, I mean, it's not like he is a yak merchant like you'd expect somebody who has a great or great offensive coordinator and a really great after catch receiver to be. Like he slings it, right? And some of his best deep throws are like drops by Jamison Williams. Like that's not his fault, right? So it's there. I just am still a skeptic. I'm not nearly the skeptic of him as I am of Love and Purdy, right? Like there's a lot more there for me to prove. This is me just kind of recovering from my Jared Goff hate and talking myself through it more than it is anything else. But I don't know. This maybe he just lacks the because I can just say that and then no one has to no one has any evidence to prove me wrong, so I could just say it.
You're one catch away by Josh Reynolds from being really wrong. Like, he catches that ball on fourth down, and you would have had to be really wrong. For me, I'll admit to this bias that because I get to see teams play the Vikings, and I know how strong the Vikings are at any given time. I will do a lot of my judging of opposing players by how they played against the Vikings. So if you asked me how good is Akeem Hicks, I might tell you the best player of all time because like he just murdered. Like if anyone says Kenny Clark, I like hide under the desk. So. I mean, they're both great
big,
players, but
big Golden Tate fan here.
exactly. If someone had brought him up, and when we went out there in 2018 and saw him play against Zimmer's defense, put up a perfect quarterback rating in that game, I was just like, man, this guy, he's not just a system quarterback or whatever. Like the arm talent is so real. The velocity he puts on the football. I mean, anyway, we don't need to debate Jared Goff all day long, but I think he's got 4 top 5 offenses now in his career. To me, that's the goal, right? Is if you can have,
He's
but
pretty good.
if he rolls out and throws it, he's no better than you at throwing the football once he has to move. So, and you have tiny hands. You can't even put your hand on the football. It's that bad. He just throws it right in the ground.
I had to pick one up in training camp. The most humiliating
It's
experience
huge.
of my life. It's
It's
the
giant.
NFL balls are insane.
Yeah. That's why when they were talking about Kenny Pickett's hand size and I measured mine, I was like, wait a minute, we have the same hands. How does he even hold on to it? Like, what?
It's like the very tail end of the ball. He's just like, yeah, I'll just like catapult it.
Right. And that's kind of what ended up happening. So here we are. I think we've got 12 teams. And now it's time, I think, to talk about the Vikings as part of this. And as we look at teams that could be in this same ballpark, I think Washington drafting number 2 overall with Jaden Daniels, but they need to prove they're a football team first to me before just even run like a franchise. I would have probably had a conversation about Atlanta and their next 2 years and the hype. And I think that they just popped that balloon in the NFL draft over what they can do over the next 2 years. But I mean, I think that their fans would, if they had drafted Dallas Turner, I think their fans would have been talking about that they should be right
like the
here.
Jets expected them to.
Right. Yeah. The Jets are another team because if Aaron Rodgers' doctors rubbed mud on it or whatever, and he suddenly goes back to being really, really good, that team can be phenomenal. I just don't buy that. I don't know if you do with the Jets.
Man, I'm not a huge fan of the coaching staff. I mean, Robert Saleh is charismatic, right? But I don't think the coaching staff generally makes good decisions. The way that they like talked around Zach Wilson was weird to me. The decisions that they've made on personnel, I think, are bizarre. Obviously, they've built an astounding defense, which I think, we talked about a lot in 2022. It was still very good in 2023, just didn't matter, like for who, for what. And they're beginning to lose some of those pieces. They just lost Bryce Huff, right? but it is still mostly a young defense. They paid Quinnen Williams, but they've got Sauce Gardner for a while. DJ Reed is actually, producing value over the contract that he signed, which is really great. There's stuff there, but the coaching staff is like a concern to me. I kind of think of Aaron Rodgers as kind of locker room cancer, and he just kind of works around it by being so insanely talented. Once you no longer meet that bar for insane talent, like what happens then? I don't know. So I'm kind of curious about that. So to me, the Falcons are, potentially here. The Jets are potentially here. This is where I begin to think about the Chargers. Um, again, I do believe in that quarterback. And maybe the Colts, because I think Anthony Richardson in his 4 games was like, hey, that's pretty good. I would probably take all of them above the Jets in a 2-year window, but I think the Jets are in this conversation. And I think we're beginning to, like, once we start talking about the Chargers and the Colts, we're beginning to think, what about the Vikings?
Well, that's right. And I think if we go kind of team by team, that the Indianapolis Colts, and also we left Jacksonville out of this. I have a
Weird.
tougher time buying Jacksonville
It's
because
difficult.
they didn't
I'm
prove it
also a
last
Trevor
year.
Lawrence believer too, but I don't know.
Me too, but can we get a receiver for him? Like, just
Yeah.
can I help you get a receiver for him? Because last year the guy threw like 4 touchdowns where his receivers went out of the back of the end zone, and I just thought that was so funny, and also cost them. But they were still a good football team last year. That division has just become kind of a monster all of a sudden, and I'm really
Out
buying
of
Anthony
nowhere.
Richardson. If Richardson is healthy and doesn't throw his body around, the way he stepped in, it wasn't always accurate, but the way he stepped in and commanded an offense was, whoa, okay, that guy's really young and
Yeah.
inexperienced and did that. But
And he
should there
produced
be
right
more?
away.
Right. And right away, it was just like he was a force right away. And so the question would be, do you buy Indianapolis in a 2-year window more than you buy the Minnesota Vikings? And I think that's a neck and neck race where they're a leg up because they drafted him last year. And so they're a little farther ahead and he can develop for another year this season before they could be a legitimate contender. The Chargers are just harder for me to put there. I think that they're pretty short on talent as a team. I do not buy their psychotic head coach as coming back.
He's
And
won everywhere he's gone. What do you want him to do?
I understand that. And they did a great job recruiting at Michigan and all their players got drafted, but that is not something that I'm believing in just yet. Although if it works out, I can't wait to hear all the should have hired Harbaugh people
Oh
spout
my
up.
God. Of course. Yeah.
But the question really comes down to, would you put ahead of the Vikings a team that has an established quarterback in Justin Herbert that we know is good? Shades of good is sort of the Jared Goff discussion, and it's my alternative 90s rock band. But with shades of
Better
good,
than
that's
Ezra
actually
type.
great. That's actually a great
Yeah.
name. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
And Indianapolis, are you buying the small sample of what you saw with Richardson plus a pretty good organization, I think, that can build a good roster? We've also left the Rams, Seattle out of this, Arizona's tank. I'm not quite ready to put those teams there. So how
Yeah.
do we match them up with, I guess this is my pick. So this is why we're haggling over this. Chargers, Colts. I think I might actually go with the Indianapolis Colts here before we get to the Vikings, because Anthony Richardson is a year ahead of JJ McCarthy. So if we're talking about really winning by 2025, that would likely be the first year we're putting expectations on McCarthy.
Yeah, and I think that you've got like good receiving talent to work with. They just drafted AD Mitchell, but they also have Michael Pittman. And they have like Josh Downs too. He's like a little speedy guy, right? So that's kind of
I
useful.
also buy their coach.
Yeah, I think Shane Steichen's great. Why do I remember all of these guys except Matt LaFleur? Okay, whatever.
It's Todd LaFleur. I don't know why you keep saying that.
It's Mike LaFleur. But yeah, I like the coaching staff. They got Gus Bradley on defense, which is fine. It's not like amazing, but it's fine. But yeah, I think that, and they just brought in the JBC, Jim Bob Cooter, on offense, right, as their offensive coordinator. There's a lot going on. They just drafted Latu on defense, which I think is fine. Obviously, the medical concern is there, but there's a lot to work with there. They've got a lot of young talent. The offensive line, I think, long term, you got to watch out for. But other than that, I think that there's like a lot to work with there. So I like the Colts. I'm still going to take, so it's my turn to draft. I'm taking the Chargers. I'm going to take them above the Vikings. We presume that JJ McCarthy is good. We know that Justin Herbert is good. And I think he's excellent. Like, I think that having his receivers injured every year has produced kind of a Trevor Lawrence dynamic where it's like, all right, yeah, I mean, Quentin Johnston sucks, and your top receiver right now is Joshua Palmer. Great. Many of us have not heard of Joshua Palmer, and that's nobody's fault. You're not supposed to have, right? So it is like tough there. I think that the way that Staley managed the games for them was so discordant with what he had intended to do that there was like no consistent offensive or defensive philosophy. There was no consistent philosophy of what to do on fourth down, and it created a lot of problems. I think that Harbaugh is going to fix all of that. I think Harbaugh is a good coach. I wouldn't ever want to know him. I don't want to be his friend, but he wins, right? He won at Stanford. He won at San Francisco. He won at Michigan. Took a little bit of time, in fairness, right? You want it like San Diego, right? Like this guy wins. And he like produces quarterbacks, right? Like at San Diego, he produced Josh Johnson, I believe a show favorite, right? So
Oh yes. Oh yes.
yeah. So like I don't know, like this guy like knows ball and he's weird about it, but players connect to him. And he kind of just understands like what makes a particular football team work. So I'm gonna trust that coaching staff. I'm gonna believe in Justin Herbert. That offensive line is getting a little bit better. I'm glad that they drafted another offensive lineman. And the defense has pieces, and I'm glad that they like continue to add edge rusher depth. They just signed Bud Dupree to round out. So he's a fourth guy. They've got Tuli Tuipulotu, who was a really good rookie last year, in addition to Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. So like there's like a lot to work with. They do need to add a little bit more to the cornerback group, safety. They want to pair somebody with Derwin James. But I think in a 2-year window, I think that there's something there, and I'm going to take the quarterback that I know, in my opinion, is good versus the quarterback that I presume to be good that may not even play very many games this year. So JJ McCarthy is on track to be a good player, but we haven't seen him do anything yet. So I'm taking Justin Herbert.
We saw a rookie minicamp practice,
Oh, you're
so
right.
I
Sorry.
don't know
Yeah.
what you're
And
saying. We haven't
yeah.
seen it yet. Okay, so yeah, the Chargers are a tougher one for me because I think that the great equalizer, even if you are a great coach, is that roster, and they are far away with that roster from where they need to be a true championship contender. And what I think about Justin Herbert is a lot of the same things that I thought about Kirk Cousins, except for he's much taller and does throw the ball harder.
Much better arm.
But
And he's a better athlete.
there's no question that the physical skills are better, but yet the tendencies are kind of the same of checks down a lot, doesn't take a whole lot of risks, kind of has to see it before he's willing to throw it. And you could always talk about the supporting cast, and you're right to talk about the supporting cast. But we're not talking about a guy who got 11 12 wins and then in the playoffs the supporting cast let him down. We're talking about a guy who has the one playoff appearance in which he couldn't finish the job and allowed a massive comeback by the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that's the team that I'm struggling with here. Is like, are we overreacting to last year's disappointment by the Jaguars not reaching the playoffs and not realizing they still have a franchise quarterback? Again, your point is we don't know on McCarthy. We do know on Trevor Lawrence that he's at very least a very good quarterback and maybe still has the ability to be great. I should do the same thing with Lawrence that I do for Herbert. Like, I'm going to have to see it first before I start calling you great. And there hasn't really been a great season. I think with the Vikings and putting them in this spot, it would kind of come down a little bit to organizationally. Like, organizationally, I think the Vikings have a good plan. They have a lot of superstar talent on offense where the Jaguars still do not. And I'm not really buying the Jaguars as an organization. And the same thing for the Falcons. They have a lot of talent and they have a proven quarterback, but that proven quarterback costs $10 gazillion, and we know what his ceiling is, and we don't know what his Achilles is going to be. Is there any other teams here that you would say should be in that 2-year discussion along with the Vikings that is not Jacksonville? Because I'm thinking about taking the Vikings right here. Jacksonville or Atlanta?
Yeah, I'm looking through this like list of Super Bowl odds right now, and the teams that are higher than the Vikings in the 2025 Super Bowl odds list, I'm like not that interested in for a 2-year window. They include the Jets, the Rams, the Browns. These are not candidates to me. Um, the Seahawks, maybe. I don't know. Uh, but after that, it's like the Saints, Raiders, Cardinals, and yeah, I'm taking the Vikings in a 2-year window over any of those teams. That's easy. The Steelers, but they don't like have a quarter. They have everything but a quarterback, and that is really important to me. So, and everything is like a stretch, right? I love the organization, I love the coaching, I love the drafting, whatever, but they don't have a quarterback, and I'm a little skeptical of the receiving situation and the offensive lines, whatever. So it's like whatever. So I'll take the Vikings ahead of those. So to me, it's like Jacksonville, Atlanta, these other teams, like maybe the Seahawks are the only other name that I throw in there for a 2-year window. I wouldn't put, and the next on the list for me, and I wouldn't even put them in the same tier, would be the Rams and then the Jets. I think is kind of where I'm at.
Because the Rams with Cooper Cup, Puka Nakua could be, and their defense improved last year from the previous season. Like, they could be a contender for this year. And we know this, you get in the NFC playoffs and kind of anything can
Yeah,
happen
anything
there.
goes. Yeah,
Whoever's playing Kansas City in the Super Bowl, like we'll see, but we shouldn't be shocked if Stafford goes on a heater in the playoffs because that's kind of what he did before. And they have the best coach and they've got a lot. They probably are deserving here in a 2-year window. I might say that the Rams, I don't know, I'm less high on the Chargers than you. There's several teams I would put ahead of them, but I think that this is a good place for the Vikings because of the 2-year element of this, where if the Rams again go 9-8 or 10-7 and lose in the first round of the playoffs or whatever, then I think it's kind of over for them with Stafford. This might be his last year in the
yeah.
NFL. I just can't, even despite their division, I cannot see the Atlanta Falcons going past the first round of the playoffs. I don't think their team is strong enough overall. And when people start naming their players, a lot of them haven't proven anything. Like, hey, Bijan Robinson, I'm like, okay, well, he was fine last year. He
He
was
had,
a
he had a
running back.
great week one highlight, a phenomenal week
Right.
one highlight.
Right.
Yeah.
And he might be amazing or he might just be okay. Kyle Pitts has proven absolutely nothing. They're going to throw it his way. I think they might have good coaching, but we're stretching on all these points.
It's a lot of we're suggesting talent more than we're identifying it.
Exactly. And with the Vikings, where you give them a lot of credit is their coaching staff, because on the defensive side, giving Brian Flores, Dallas Turner to go along with Grenard Van Ginkel, these are guys who are going to be there for at least 2 years, probably more than that. Washington is my holdup here because they
I
drafted the number
can't.
2 overall quarterback.
It's tough. I can't. The offensive, like, if so, like organizationally, obviously, that's like a huge problem for me. But they also just have holes everywhere. They've got a great receiving group, right? But that offensive line is a disaster. The defensive line, I think they're just going to begin losing guys again, right? They did re-sign Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen, but we're talking about 2-year windows. I don't know if they can hold on to those guys. They lost Cameron Curl as safety. They lost their linebackers. I mean, they added some linebackers in free agency, I think like Bobby Wagner, but it's like, what are we doing with that?
For a year.
Yeah. The cornerback situation, it's like, I don't know. I can't really get behind. So if they had talent, I could overlook the coaching staff problem and the organization problem. But I can't even get there. So it's tough for me to put Washington into this conversation. But yeah, having the second overall pick at quarterback, I mean that's a huge boon, both from having a talent at quarterback probably, and also having cost savings that you can take advantage of. What's interesting is that if all the teams that you identified before Washington, if we were talking 3-year window, the Vikings would clear so many of them, because it's like we got Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford, like, yeah, 3-year window buy, right? So that's interesting, but the 2-year window makes it tough, right? In terms of like where you'd put the Vikings in relation to them. This is like where, like, I'm like, maybe, I don't know.
Right. How good can JJ McCarthy get? How quickly? And that is a difficult thing to answer after one rookie minicamp practice in which, it was some good, some bad. I think that putting the Vikings here is at very least fair. So for timing purposes, we're putting the Vikings here.
Sure.
And that would put them 15th, which is where they show up on every list historically of all time. And after this year, we might feel very different about that if we see some of JJ McCarthy and have a sense for where he's going. As of right now, we don't have a sense for even when he's going to play, if he's going to play this year, which makes the discussion, I think, kind of interesting. So let's talk about, before we wrap, they're 15th in, say, deserved fan enthusiasm for their next 2-year window. What would be if you were Mr. Wet Blanket at the party? Not that you would get invited
Me?
to a party, but if there were people talking that you were near and they were saying, oh man, this Vikings team in the next 2 years, we're going to the Super Bowl, baby. And you wanted to step in and say, well, actually, fellas, what would you make as your counter argument to these enthusiastic imaginary bros?
I'd say that having fourth choice at quarterback sucks, or I guess fifth choice. I keep on forgetting about Michael Penix. But yeah, having fifth choice at quarterback sucks. I know he's a first round pick, but I mean, you have no idea if he's any good. And 15 other teams, or not 15, but a bunch of other teams passed on him, passed on the opportunity to draft him. I think that the defense is held together by duct tape and string, and you just kind of hope that the guy that that crafted a 12-game window of good defense, I want to say, can do it again with like all of these broken and spare parts. The Vikings let more talent walk than they brought in. It's very difficult to argue that they're a better team than they were before, and they weren't a very good team last year. I think people underestimate how good of a quarterback Kirk Cousins is, which is like a very tough sentence for me personally to say. But it's like hard for a rookie to get up to that level. Like the reason Kirk Cousins was a disappointment is because you paid him like he was a really high level guy, because he demonstrated that he could almost get there. Almost getting to really high level is pretty rare. The Panthers tried it with the first overall pick at quarterback and they couldn't do it, right? Most quarterbacks fail. That's the game. So I think that, if I were to be a wet blanket, which I can't imagine ever being in that role, you'd say most quarterbacks fail. This was the fifth quarterback selected. The defense is not as good as you think it is, because when it was solved, it was decimated. It was destroyed. Talent matters, and there's only so much you can do. And the Vikings are going to end up in cap pressure anyway, even though they've got that rookie quarterback, because they're going to have to pay people like Justin Jefferson, right? It's going to be difficult for them to continue adding talent, and it seems like they're gutting their offensive line, the thing that turned the team around the last 2 years, like losing Ezra Cleveland, not signing a left guard. Who knows what's going on with Ed Ingram? That's kind of tough.
Okay, so I think that all of those things, if I may be the imaginary bro, I think that all of those things definitely apply to this year. If you were making the argument of, hey, this team can't compete for a Super Bowl in 2024, those would be the things. You get to be left guard guy and be like, who is Blake Brandel anyway? And that's fair. And you could use the term forklifted for the center that is used often when it comes to playing any good defensive tackle. And the depth of the defense is certainly not there yet. And they draft Kyrie Jackson. We'll see if there's anything there for a 4th-round pick. Hard to say, right? Or is there a next step for Mekhi Blackmon, or is he kind of a 500 snap role player type of guy? Like, all these things are pretty big questions for this present team. But in the 2-year window, and even when you talk about the spending, Justin Jefferson and the enormous cap hits, probably the way that these have been structured in the past, will not kick in for a little bit. Until he's, then he's got the 35 million cap hit or whatever, but it usually takes a couple years before they get there and restructures and all that. That means a lot of cap space to fill in the gaps. So if you took a defense that is already very good and has a lot of these young pieces, Ivan Pace Jr., Jonathan Grenard is just entering his prime and so forth, if Dallas Turner works out, and then add AJ Terrell, who's going to be excuse me, a free agent next year or something like that, right? BJ Hill, I was doing the look at the free agents for 2025 already. If you add some good talent there with the cap space that you have in the short window, one thing we know is that the Wilfs ownership will push all that into the future if they have to. And if McCarthy if he fails, it's not going to be for a lack of trying, from the receivers to the offensive tackles to the coach to the quarterback coach to everybody pointing all their lasers into the success of this young man. So I think that they deserve to be in this, very much in this discussion, but not for this year, but for next year, and projecting what this roster will look like and his development, that he's going to have to learn a lot of different things before he can get to that point. But the final point that I would like to make about McCarthy is, yes, he was QB5 in a draft where they all went in the top 10. So really, he was drafted in the same spot as
A bit
Patrick
of a bad
Mahomes.
faith argument from
Just
me. Yeah.
saying. Yeah, just saying. Um, but I think that the thing that when we go through this difference making quarterbacks, the ones that I believe in more usually, and this doesn't exactly apply to Jared Goff, but it's like the playmakers. And I think that there's a playmaking element of JJ McCarthy that might even out some of the odds there with him if added to great wide receivers. So that would be my case for them deserving this 2-year window of excitement. And, like you said, if you stretch it out to 3, I think they're one of the teams that you'd look at even higher on this list for a 3-year window, but that's really hard to do. So tell me this then, Arif, where do you stand on that? Like which one of these would you say, which one of those sides of those arguments would you agree with more?
I think okay. So I am still a little skeptical of the cap space. I know that they're projected to get 100 million, and that'll only go down a little bit with the Jefferson stuff, just because teams that build defenses through the cap don't seem to do a very good job, just generally speaking. The Bears might be the closest example that we have, but I mean Jacksonville tries it every year, and that defense is still a disappointment. And players that are generally well regarded too. It's tough, right? But I do think that, like, yeah, I mean, yeah, he's the 5th quarterback, but he was like the 10th player, right? Selected. Like he's generally regarded as having first round talent. And like, yeah, sure, most quarterbacks fail. I think it's like for quarterbacks in the first round, it's like a 60% bust rate. But like what are you gonna do about that? Like it could be him or it could be Caleb Williams. I don't know. So yeah, I think that believing in McCarthy's talent, I think, is the strongest argument here. I think that you'll probably improve the defense with the cap space that you have, but probably not as much as you think. I shouldn't even say probably. You'll definitely improve the defense with that cap space, just probably not as much as you think. Yeah, I mean, probably this year they won't compete, but that's like not a huge concern. So whatever. Like I don't believe in the wet blanket version of the argument just because I had to twist. It was very obvious I had to twist a couple of things around in order to do that. But yeah, I think it primarily just falls on the quarterback and his potential. And yeah, I mean, he does have some playmaking moxie to him, right? Like that's nice. If he can kind of control, what that looks like and measure, like thread in a little bit of ball placement and accuracy. I mean, there's like a ton there, and that's the whole reason that he's sitting this year, right? Is to develop the footwork to make that, a more consistent feature of his game. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the arrow is pointing up for the Vikings, so I I I believe in the JJ McCarthy version of the argument probably the most.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would lean more toward that. And I think that this is what they've planned for some time. So it probably didn't end at we just draft one and then see what happens. And the other thing I believe in strongly is Justin Jefferson's impact on quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's
That
fair.
it just can't really be understated what a guy like him, and everybody who follows the Vikings knows this.
They're gonna
Who would
announce it soon, right? Like the Justin Jefferson. It sounded like they
yeah.
wanted to announce it
It's
during the draft, but they're like, let's
I
not do
I
the draft.
I think so. I got mini camp circled. Don't waste this
Okay.
man's time with OTAs. Let's just get him here for mini camp. Who would you have picked last? Like dead ass last.
Dead last. Oh
Yeah,
my
well,
god.
obviously
Okay.
we could do a 4-hour podcast to get to number 32, but like who
Yeah,
would
yeah,
you have?
yeah. I think I have to go with the Panthers.
Oh, yeah.
Um, David Tepper is the new Dan Snyder, it seems like. And if you can't get out from under how bad your owner is, it's tough to do anything. They consistently make bad moves in the draft. They consistently make bad free agent signings that are easy to identify as bad at the time. Um, I don't know. It's just like a bad team. So the Panthers might be near the bottom of this list just because of the organizational problems there. There are teams that have less talent than them, for sure. But man,
I think I would go with the New York Giants. I just don't see the path.
Yeah, I think they'll probably draft. I mean, for a 2-year window, yeah, that makes sense. I think they'll probably draft a quarterback next year, so they'll get out from under that. I think the front office is a little better than it was, but low bar. So
Could be coach firings and so forth if
yeah,
they win 3
yeah,
games or whatever this year. I think they're in pretty bad shape. Arif, wideleft.football, great place to go and read everything that you write. So if you like this, then go there. And if you don't, it's still worth checking out because you got a lot of interesting stuff. So I appreciate your time as always. And we'll hit up a Lynx game soon, man.
yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, season's about to start like
It's,
Tuesday, something like that. Oh my
yep,
gosh.
exactly. So let's go. All right. Thanks, Arif. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Football.